immediately underway. As you know, we are here to consider the supplementary estimate C 2014-15, Vote 1C under the Communication Security Establishment, and Vote 1C under National Defence, referred to this committee on Thursday, February 19th, 2015. We have two witnesses appearing before us today, the Honourable Jason Kenney, PCMP, Minister of National Defence, and the Honourable Julian Fantino, PCMP, the Associate Minister of National Defence. We will begin with opening statements.
Point of order, Mr.
Mr. Harris, point of order.
Looking at the hour that we're beginning here, I would like to suggest either we get a commitment from the Minister to stay for a full hour of our committee meeting today, or that we dispense with opening remarks and get straight to the issue of questions. He's here to deal with questions on the estimates. We have questions here that we'd like to ask. I'm sure the government members can ask whatever questions need to be asked to elucidate the answers that the Minister wants to give.
I understand that we are operating under time constraints. I understand the Minister has an obligation at 5 o'clock. Mr. Bazan, you're responding to the point of order.
That point of order, it's not a point of order, and so I'd just say that it is our routine proceedings that witnesses are allowed to give opening remarks. I wish that we'd respect our routine proceedings and move on that basis.
It is a point of order. It has to do with the order of business and the fact that we've been deprived of half an hour as a result of the vote. The Minister may have a commitment at 5 o'clock, but what could be more important than speaking to
Well, Mr. Harris, we're here to consider the supplementary estimates. The time frame within which we have to consider the subs are now. The Minister has indicated he'll be returning to discuss the main estimates, but we will proceed now. And Minister Kenney, your opening remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just for greater clarity, I would be happy to come back to committee after the next vote. I think we're anticipating another vote, but I have to leave this building by about 5:25 for an important speech that has been planned with a group from all across Canada. So I could come back till 5:25.
Well, thank you. We'll see how the clock stands at the end of the vote.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, colleagues. It's really a great honour to be in your midst for the first time in my capacity as Minister for National Defence. And I've, as I said, my very first day in this post, there is no greater privilege and honour than to serve with our men and women in uniform. And I come from a long history in my own family of military service, including my own father, who was a jet fighter pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And so this is the highest honour and privilege of my life, to be honest, in this position. I look forward to working with all of you who I know share my commitment and dedication to the Canadian Armed Forces and their critically important mission. I'm delighted here to be joined by my Associate Minister Julian Fantino, as well as Senior Associate Deputy Minister Bill Jones, Chief Financial Officer Claude Rochette, Acting Vice Chief Major General John Madauer, and Chief of the Communication Security Establishment Greta Bosmer. This is, as I said, my first time before you, and before I begin my statement on the supplementary estimates, colleagues, let me reiterate our shared condolences to the family of Sergeant Andrew Doiron, who I met yesterday at the ramp repatriation ceremony with His Excellency, the Governor-General at CFB Trenton. And I know that all of our thoughts are with him and his comrades. I was so impressed to see a large squad of his comrades from the Canadian Special Operations Regiment and JTF-2 attending the ramp ceremony and expressing their ongoing determination to serve in Canada, including their support for our mission against ISIL in Iraq. Looking back, Mr. Chair, in 2014 will prove to have been a pivotal year for domestic and international security. We saw, of course, Russia's brazen de facto invasion of Ukraine, the spread of the terrorist death cult known as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant in the Middle East, and, of course, the murders of two members of the Canadian Armed Forces right here at home. Nous constatons une instabilité croissante.
We see growing international instability, which creates a growing threat, both to Canadians and to Canadian interests abroad. That means it's up to us to play our part when it comes to contributing to international peace and security. Doing so, often means deployed operations, which, by their very nature, incur incremental costs.
With the Supplementary Estimate C, the Department of National Defence is requesting an additional $142.3 million in spending authorities. Of this amount, $138.1 million will cover additional costs for overseas operations, the bulk of which, $122.6 million to be precise, is dedicated to Operation Impact. That is our contribution to the multinational coalition against ISIL in the Republic of Iraq. The Operation Impact consists of approximately 600 personnel, 6 CF-18 fighters, 1 C-150 Polaris aerial refueler, and 2 CP-140 Aurora reconnaissance aircraft. These are the newly modernized equipment that are doing tremendous work with the coalition. We also have members of our Special Operations Forces, as I just mentioned, advising and assisting local forces, particularly of the Kurdish Peshmerga in the Erbil region of the Kurdish part of northern Iraq. The majority
of costs indicated, about $73.6 million, are for aircraft and ammunition costs. These costs include fuel, operation and maintenance, spare parts, ammunition, and in-service support. The assets covered in this cost also include the deployed aircraft I mentioned a moment ago, as well as the C-17 Globemaster, as well as the C-130J Hercules transport aircraft that are sustaining the mission. This number also includes $8.8 million in personnel costs, such as certain allowances granted to deployed members, including hardship and risk allowances. Other personnel-related costs, such as incidentals and ground transportation for personnel transiting to and from the theater, total $2.2 million. Meals and accommodation costs for personnel while in theater total $34.2 million. Moreover, other costs such as camp setup fees, the resupply of general consumable material, and other miscellaneous amenities and local purchases total $3.3 million.
The coalition against ISIL is having a real impact. Where last year ISIL roamed unfettered, gaining more territory day by day, they can no longer do so. They can no longer move in large-scale troop movements. They are no longer gaining territory in Iraq. They are instead losing territory there. Airstrikes are having a demonstrable impact upon their command and control capabilities, as well as removing key equipment and personnel from the battlefield. And when they do go on the offensive, that is to say when ISIL does, they take significant losses. We have reports that they are moving increasing amounts of their armored equipment and heavy equipment from Iraq into Syria in order to try to move them away from the Allied air campaign. And so, as you know, the most recent news is that a Iraqi security force mission against ISIL into Crete is apparently being successful in pushing them back, and ISIL is on the retreat. This is all good news, but more yet needs to be done. Chairman, the Department is also requesting $17 million in incremental costs for Operation Reassurance. That is our contribution to NATO assurance measures in Central and Eastern Europe, to send a message, a clear message to Vladimir Putin that we stand with our NATO allies against his intimidation of the sovereign nations of Central and Eastern Europe that are our NATO allies. This OP impact includes military activities such as Baltic Air Police, and that 4 Canadian Hornets have been involved in those activities. Of course, infantry ground training exercises, and the presence of currently the HMCS Fredericton in the Black Sea. Monsieur le Président, outre le financement pour les deux...
Mr. Chair, in addition to funding for 2 major operations currently underway, you will see that the estimates also include provisions for several other areas. We are requesting $3 million for the Canadian Armed Forces advertising campaign to ensure that our recruiting targets are met and that our military is well placed to fulfill its missions in Canada and around the world.
Often we hear from parliamentarians. They gross up every dollar that's spent by the Government of Canada on advertising and characterize it as partisan. Mr. Chair, every single government in modern Canada has had a budget for Canadian Armed Forces advertising for recruitment purposes, and it's an essential part of our recruitment strategy and that of every other modern military. So I would ask members, if they want to be intellectually honest about this, to reflect the fact that this is normal CAF recruitment advertising, not what is mischaracterized as partisan or political advertising. De plus, une somme de 1,60
Also, $1.75 million will go towards site remediation work as the department takes its responsibilities as property holders and environmental stewards very seriously.
$1 million in transfer to other organizations, $1.4 million to Shared Services Canada for costs associated with access to rapid and secure satellite comms, and $460,000 to the National Sciences and Engineering Research Council to support joint research grant projects. If approved, these funds would raise National Defence's total spending authorities to over $20 billion this fiscal year, an increase of just over from just over $19.9 billion in Supplementary Estimates B, and to give this some context, an increase from the Forces budget in 2005, which was then a little over $14 billion, so a 27% increase in the past 9 years. These estimates demonstrate the government's steadfast commitment to ensure that the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces will always have the equipment and resources they need to get the job that we ask of them done. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to any questions you have. I believe Minister Fantino, pardon me, may have his own remarks. I'm sorry for speaking so quickly to the translators, but I'm trying to respect your time.
Thank you, Minister Kenny. Minister Fantino, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee today, and pleased to be here with Minister Kenny and, of course, members of the Canadian Armed Forces and officials as well. Like Mr. Kenny, I would like to preface my remarks by extending my condolences to the family of Sergeant Doron, who was tragically killed in Iraq this past Friday. His death is a somber reminder that the pursuit of international peace and security is not without risk. And I wish to also extend a speedy recovery to his colleagues who were also wounded actually, during the incident. It's a privilege to be here as Associate Minister of National Defence, and I'm honored to return to this department working with great people, endeavoring great causes on behalf of our country and free nations. My role as Associate Minister of National Defence encompasses a number of very specific areas. First, it involves making sure that our sovereignty is exercised in the North. Mr. Chair, the role of national defence and the Canadian Armed Forces in the Arctic is clearly defined by the Canadian First Defence Strategy. With increased commercial shipping, natural resource exploration, and tourism in the North, it is ever more critical that national defence has the right surveillance and monitoring capabilities, emergency response options, and appropriate policies in place to enable the Canadian Armed Forces to fulfill its responsibilities in the Arctic. Another major responsibility of my portfolio is information technology security and foreign intelligence, which serve to defend our nation's security values and interests. And while this environment might be more abstract, its effect is unequivocally tangible. The Internet and communications technologies have transformed almost every aspect of our lives. These advances in how we communicate with each other have in fact produced incredible opportunities, but have also meant new vulnerabilities and challenges. While the Department of Public Safety maintains the lead for implementing the Government of Canada's cyber security strategy, the Communications Security Establishment, or CSE, has a vital role in protecting and defending federal government systems. National Defence also plays a supporting role and has a great interest in protecting its systems against cyber threats, given the military's reliance on cyberspace to enable its operations. And as we have seen recently, cyberspace is progressively more of a target for both terrorists and malicious cyber actors. Government of Canada networks are attacked millions of times every single day. Some of these provoking acts are done by foreign states like Russia, which seek to expand their influence at the expense of Canadian interests. We must remain vigilant, and we must protect Canadian sovereignty from those who would do us harm. Finally, Mr. Chair and members, let me turn to the relatively minor housekeeping items in the estimates before you that pertain to the communications security establishment. You will note the transfer of 2 generators to the Canadian Forces Base Trenton from CSE in the amount of $600,000. These generators are no longer required by CSE after the construction of the new headquarters. And there's also a $10,000 transfer from Public Works to CSE for reimbursement for the transformation of pay administration. For the safety and privacy of its employees, CSE will use its own payroll system rather than be integrated into the government-wide system. And with that, Mr. Chair and members, I will bring my remarks to a close, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Fantino. And we will begin our questions with Mr. Chizu, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, ministers, to appearing in the front of the committee. Minister Kenny, thank you especially for you to appearing before this committee today, and congratulations for your appointment. Seeing as this is the National Defense Committee, could you please explain to us and all Canadians why it is so important, from a national defense perspective, to have our members from our Canadian Armed Forces abroad contributing to the fight against ISIL?
Chair, before doing so, I neglected to mention the presence of Commodore Scott Bishop, who is here as well. Sorry, Commodore, I didn't see it at the end of the table there. Mr. Chizu, thank you for that question. We know that the phenomena of jihadist terrorism is not new, that this is a uniquely pernicious form of violence and political instability that ranges all the way from Western Africa in Nigeria with Boko Haram down to militias in Mindanao and southern Philippines, in an arc of violence that claims hundreds of victims often every day, and which seeks increasingly to project its dystopian vision of a caliphate based on a violent application of 7th century Sharia legal concepts throughout the world. What is unique in that movement is that these so-called ISIL, or in Arabic Daesh, explicitly has declared itself the caliphate, an idea that is unfortunately very seductive to many radicalized individuals looking for, who are attracted to this dystopian idea, which is why the number of personnel willing to sacrifice their lives or risk their lives for this so-called caliphate have continued to increase. We, and I say we, I mean the civilized world, must do everything that it can to ensure that this movement does not actually have the capacity to metastasize from a pseudo-state into a real state. Had the world not taken action through the coalition beginning last fall, had ISIL been able to continue gaining territory in Iraq, taking advantage of certain weaknesses in that country, had it been able to take possession of oil fields and other cities, they took possession of the second largest city in Iraq and the ancient Mesopotamian capital of Mosul. Had they been able to continue doing this, their prestige as a movement would have grown, their capacity to recruit individuals, their resources and finances would have increased, and they would be posing a very serious, perhaps existential threat to security in the Middle East. Let us not forget that most of the militants who have joined Daesh are people who have come from other countries, from all the way from West Africa to North America to Western Europe, etc. And many of these people pose a security risk to us should they return home. As you know, we believe that there are a not insignificant number of Canadians participating in the jihadi campaign of Daesh. And so it is incumbent upon us to, at the very least, contain this this death cult, as I characterize it, to prevent them from gaining new territory and additional resources, to degrade its capabilities, and ultimately, in partnership with with our allies in the Middle East, to destroy it. And that will send an important message to those who might be inspired to Daesh's message of radicalization, that it is not, in fact, the realization of this dystopian dream of the caliphate, that it is actually just a bunch of ragtag thugs.
Minister, in your opinion, why is, again, so important that Canada participates in this mission as member of an international coalition?
Obviously, with our limited resources and our geographic remoteness, we have limited capabilities in containing and degrading an organization like this operating in the Middle East. But we have a role to play, as your question suggests, with our allies. So we are there. There are actually 60 countries, so over 60 countries, that have joined in one form or another the international coalition against ISIL, against Daesh. Our Chief of Defense Staff, General Lawson, recently attended a meeting in Riyadh with his counterparts from those more than 60 countries. Approximately 24 of those countries are engaged in active military operations in Iraq and or in Syria against Daesh. And so, you know, the tradition of Canada is that when our security is being threatened, when there is a serious destabilizing threat to global security such as this, our tradition, our values dictate, and in this case our interests require that we play a role and not sit on the sidelines. I would remind you, Mr. Chesu, that we are taking a whole-of-government approach to the menace of Daesh. We are doing so through what is, I believe, the world's 6th largest humanitarian aid contribution to the internally displaced persons of Iraq. Through our diplomatic efforts, Minister Nicholson just visited Baghdad and Erbil, as well as other capital, Amman and Abu Dhabi, to discuss our political efforts in the containment of ISIL. Our encouragement to the Iraqi government and parliamentarians to unify and avoid sectarian divisions in confronting ISIL. But we believe there is an essential military component to this. The military dimension is not sufficient, but it is necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Chesu. Mr. Harris, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister Kenney, for joining us today and for agreeing to stay for a full hour, despite the fact we have bells, which we often have during this committee, is unfortunately this time of day. Congratulations on your appointment as Minister. I will have to start off with a question about your communication to the public in the form of Twitter. Shouldn't the public of Canada really expect, when the Minister of Defence communicates in this way, that it be based in reality and not on the basis of some mistaken understanding of what's going on in other parts of the world? Can we expect that? And sir, would you be prepared to refrain from this kind of offensive and erroneous propaganda attempts in the future?
I'll leave it to the minister whether or not
he needs to be protected by you, does he?
But I would say that it's not relevant to the supplemental Cs that we're setting at this point in time. So I leave it to your discretion or the minister's discretion if you wish to respond to this question.
To that point of order, sir.
Mr. Harris.
We're talking about providing an additional $122.6 million to continue the...
I don't know how a Twitter account fits into $122 million.
Communication by the Minister of Defence on matters of this nature are certainly relevant, but I hope that that time doesn't...
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Thank you, Mr. Bazan. I would leave to the Minister to decide whether or not
I'm happy. Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'm happy that he asked the question, which was, should the Minister of National Defence not ensure that communications such as on social media are accurate? Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. And I think one of the most important reasons for our Operation Impact is to protect the innocent, including women and children, from the sexual slavery and human trafficking of ISIL, which was the point of the message to which the member refers. According to the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, ISIL is guilty of abductions, rape, and other forms of sexual and gender-based violence perpetrated against women and children that have victimized at least 7,000 Yazidi women and girls, including children as young as 8 who have been systematically raped and sold into sexual slavery. Regrettably, people being sold into sexual slavery by ISIL as a fundraising mechanism throughout the broader Middle East. Not only Yazidi women and children, but Christian women and children, Kurds and minorities, any of those deemed enemies by ISIL, as soon as they take a village, a town, a city,
Mr. Chairman, could I
regard
ask
these
the Minister
women and
not
children.
to take up all the time in a very
I'll just
long
finish
answer?
with this
Mr.
sentence.
Harris, you asked a question.
I asked him whether he was prepared to be accurate in the future.
So, Mr. Chairman, I stand by that message, which is on International Women's Day, that we are there in part to defend the women and children of Iraq.
Mr. Minister, you started with partly expressing your condolences to the family of Sergeant Dorian, and I have already on many occasions done that publicly and would do so again today. Part of the investigation into his death is being conducted by the military police, and I wonder if you could share with us your confidence or otherwise in the military police conducting that investigation in light of the report to you of the Military Police Complaints Commission that was released yesterday but was in the hands of the government since last May. So all of those recommendations and findings would have been known to your government. Do you have confidence in the military police investigating team to do that work? And secondarily, are you prepared to follow the recommendations of the person, the civilian oversight that's there, which you have the authority, of course, and responsibility to do? Are you prepared to do that? And do you have confidence, or should there be other assistance to the military police in conducting this investigation?
Again, there is nothing in the supplemental estimate Cs that relate to the Military Police Complaints Commissioner report, and I would suggest that on the order of relevance to the stay at hand that Mr. Harris comes back to the supplementary estimates. But again, if the Minister wants to, he never even mentioned it in his opening comments, so I don't know how you make this a relevant question.
To that point of order, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the Minister actually desires and wants Mr. Bazan to try to defend him from questions from the opposition, but I hope maybe he's only hoping to use up my time, and I hope that'll be taken from it.
Gentlemen, thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Bazan does have a point, but again, I leave to the Minister whether or not he wishes to respond.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to acknowledge Mr. Harris for his longstanding concern and interest for this matter, for the language investigation. And there is no doubt that this whole affair has been mishandled. As the report tabled by the chair of the Military Police Complaints Commission yesterday demonstrates. I have not yet had a chance to read the report, as it is longer than 1,000 pages. I have reviewed a summary of its recommendations and look forward to a meeting with the Provost Marshal to discuss the findings and recommendations. The government did not have the recommendations a year ago. There was an interim report. We have not yet had a chance to digest the 1,000-page report, which indicated that a number of the allegations were not substantiated. However, it did indicate that there was wrongdoing and incompetence on the part of the military police in many instances. This is unacceptable, and the committee has my clear assurance that I will work with the Provost Marshal and the military to accept any course of action necessary to ensure that these errors are not repeated in the future.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, you will notice that the bells are calling us to a vote in 30 minutes. Standing orders provide for suspension or adjournment, but with the unanimous consent of this committee, I believe we could carry on for at least 15 minutes. Do I have...
Agreed.
Agreed?
15 minutes.
Mr. Harris, you have 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Minister, I would like to advise you of a media report that was out earlier this week from military sources suggesting that the preparations for by Special Forces expansion have already been made, establishing logistics and medical support in northern Iraq that would be required for an expansion of the mission. In light of this information and the sad death of Sergeant Doiron and the other casualties, are further casualties being anticipated, and is this being done in anticipation of increasing the number of boots on the ground that Canada is considering?
I'm not familiar with that report or any additional assets in support of our soft personnel in northern Iraq. And I can tell you that there is no planning to increase the commitment of 69 special operators in that region. If you ask, are we anticipating more casualties, we certainly hope not. There is, of course, an inherent risk in any military deployment, as Mr. Harris will well know. And of course, that's why we have to ensure that there's appropriate support for our troops. But I'm not aware of any increase in infrastructure. We certainly have no intention of increasing the number of SOF operators in the region.
Is there any contemplation being given to changing the instructions to our forces to stick to the notion of aiding and assisting and training and avoiding the combat zones that we've had?
Well, you've accurately described the current rules of engagement that were reflected in the motion adopted in Parliament last fall. The government has not yet taken a final decision on potential renewal or extension of the mission. So I would have to ask the member to wait until that decision is taken, and we will certainly report it to Parliament in the form of a motion.
You spoke today in the House, and we've heard other reports about the activities of the Iraqi forces, not the Kurdish force, but the Iraqi forces, operating against Turkey. And one of the other reports that we're getting is that the Saudis are complaining that the Iraqis are being commanded by Revolutionary Guards from Iran, and that the Shia militias are receiving that. Are we now then the allies of the Iranian National Guards in this battle? And is this was this anticipated by this government, and how do we coordinate or not with the Iranian Revolutionary Guards commanders in the operations in northern Iraq?
Thank you. Very good question, Chair. We have no intention of cooperating with IRG commanders. Our relationship there is at the invitation of the Republic of Iraq and also the Kurdish regional government. We are dealing most directly with Iraqi security force commanders and Kurdish Peshmerga commanders. Obviously, Canada has many concerns about the nature and intentions of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And clearly, we do not want our anti-ISIL mission of Operation Impact to become, we don't want this to turn into a sectarian division within Iraq. We encourage the Iraqi government to work with all of its communities to ensure there's a unified front, including both Shia and Sunni, against the threat of ISIL.
At time, Mr. Harris. Mr. Norlock, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to the witnesses. Thank you for attending today. Minister Kenney, I'm going to try to be succinct, but in the hopes that you will expand on the following question. Why are we, I'm referring to Operation Reassurance, why are we in Eastern Europe? What assistance are we providing along with our allies to the good people of the Ukrainian area, such as the radar images, the satellite images, the non-lethal equipment, and the financial aid to those people?
Thank you, Mr. Norlock. Following Vladimir Putin's illegal de facto invasion of Ukraine, first with Crimea and laterally in parts of eastern Ukraine, Canada, together with our NATO allies, decided it was important to send a message of literally reassurance to our NATO allies, particularly those bordering or in the proximity of Russia. One of the reasons for this is that Vladimir Putin has used the presence of a Russophone, ethnically Russian population in eastern Ukraine and Crimea as the pretext for his de facto invasion of those areas, claiming that he is protecting the interests of those minorities. You will be aware that there are also Russian ethnic and Russian language-speaking minorities in other countries of Eastern and Central Europe, including most notably the Baltic countries, that have very limited ability to defend themselves against Russia, given their small size and resources. Consequently, it was the view of the alliance that we should together send a strong message of our determination to respect the alliance, and so through a series of joint exercises, including one in which we are involved called Baltic Air Policing, we are sending it, because these very small countries in the Baltic states, they have populations of under 3 million in each case. They don't have significant air assets. So Baltic Air Policing, one dimension of Operation Reassurance, sends a message to the Russian Air Force and to Vladimir Putin that we are patrolling the skies over the Baltic states. Our joint infantry training exercises in Poland, where we have some 250 Canadian infantrymen and women, demonstrates our presence, frankly, in eastern side of Poland, close to Russia, that is part of NATO territory. As does the presence of the HMCS Fredericton in the Black Sea. The Fredericton re-entered the Black Sea on Monday of this week. Immediately following that, 2 Russian naval vessels were tracking the movements of the Fredericton, and there were Russian jet fighters that, to use the colloquial expression, buzzed, flew at low altitude over the Fredericton. So I think that's, in other words, a success. The Russians know we are there as part of NATO. We're not going away. And the message is, don't even think about further destabilizing, particularly the NATO areas of Eastern and Central Europe.
Thank you very much. And could you talk a little bit about why we are increasing our assistance, in particular to the technology, or to sending radar images, satellite images, and why we've chosen the kind of aid we've chosen, such as non-lethal equipment and financially?
Sure. The support that you've just mentioned that Canada has provided to Ukraine is outside the context of Operation Reassurance, which is Op Reassurance is strictly within the NATO space. You've mentioned other support that we have provided bilaterally to our friends in Ukraine. Most recently, the Government of Canada signed a memorandum of understanding with Ukraine to provide images obtained from our radar Sat-2 satellite in various sites of eastern Ukraine that can help the Ukrainian Military Command identify foreign movements, including heavy equipment in eastern Ukraine. This is something that President Poroshenko specifically requested of us when he visited Ottawa in September. Similarly, we provided several tons of non-kinetic military equipment in the fall, including winter gear that was surplus, Canadian Armed Forces winter gear, that has been hugely helpful, I understand, to the Ukrainian forces, and non-kinetic equipment like night vision goggles, and these things have, I believe, helped to save lives. I should also mention that we are actively exploring a number of potential training missions for the Canadian forces in Ukraine, together with our allies in the United States. And we have joined the contact group that the United States and the United Kingdom established with Ukraine on military questions. So we are actively involved in scoping out possibilities for training missions there.
Yeah, since we're dealing with the supplements, I noticed that Operation Reassurance is somewhere around 34 million in the supplementary. I wonder if you could tell us what that encompasses. I noticed one of the major costs are the kind of costs that we would all incur in any operation, food, fuel. I wonder if you could comment on those costs.
To be clear, the subsea request for Operation Reassurance activities is for $17 million, of which $13.3 million are general costs, particularly related to ship operating costs for fuel and food for the Fredericton. $3.7 million in contingency costs. And those are the major costs that we are seeking to cover in supplementary estimate C.
Thank you. And I wonder if you could make a few short comments with regard to there's been some discussion in news media surrounding economic sanctions as part of our our total, shall we say, efforts to dissuade Mr. Putin from further expansions in Eastern Europe, and I wonder if you could talk about that.
Briefly, please.
Yeah, well, of course, Canada has been imposing sanctions on Russia and Russian companies and individuals now for several months. People associated closely with the regime who have been banned for travel to Canada, but also a number of Russian corporations that we believe are involved in what I will call the Russian military-industrial complex. We've imposed financial sanctions on them and on some Russian banks that we believe have been involved in the, indirectly at least, in the de facto invasion of Crimea and eastern Ukraine.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Murray, by the clock on the wall, I would say, unfortunately, about 4 minutes, please.
Okay, well, I have, of course, 7 minutes worth to ask, so I'll ask others after. I just want some clarification about the sub-C number of 122 million. In your comments, you noted that Operation Impact consists of approximately 600 personnel, and then you noted that we also have members of Special Operation Forces, so that implies that's in addition to the 600, whereas your note in February 19th said that these funds are for an average of 600. So is that to mean that the Special Operations Forces are not included in the assessment of the supplementary incremental costs?
Thank you. The 600 personnel that I referred to are associated with the RCAF air mission. They're based in Kuwait. Then, of course, there's the additional special ops personnel, 69 in near Erbil. There are $8.8 million in personnel costs that are associated with the hardship allowance and risk allowance, and $2.2 million in other personnel-related costs, such as incidentals, ground transport for personnel, et cetera.
Yeah, so but this says it's for the 600. It does not say for the 600 and the Special Operations Forces, so I'm asking whether the incremental costs of the Special Operations Forces are not in this 122
they
million.
are included. Both the SOF and RCAF dimensions of Operation Impact are included in the 122.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, what date does a date from these incremental costs?
Well, this dates from the beginning of our commitment in October of last year through to the end of this fiscal year.
Okay, so it doesn't include the Special Operations Forces aspect of the mission that happened in September?
Yeah, I think there might be some initial costs for the setup of the SOF mission that were covered in the previous estimates.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm asking these questions because, as we know, the Parliamentary Budget Officer claimed to have done very conservative estimating, and at the high end of his range, it was $40 million or plus more than you've. So
can I clarify?
Could I ask that you would table the department's estimated costs for each of the categories that the Parliamentary Budget Officer utilized, and be clear whether that starts at the very beginning of the mission's costs?
Sure. In principle, yes. I would ask Ms. Murray if you could maybe specify in writing exactly what you're referring to, so I can be sure that I respond as accurately as possible.
Okay. All right.
I would just say that I think the PBO's report included the full estimate, his full estimate of cost of the mission. What I'm presenting here is up to the end of the fiscal. Yeah, what I'm presenting is up to the. Thank you, but up to the end of the fiscal year. If we were to end the mission at the end of March, there would be additional costs that we have not included here in repatriating people and equipment and restoring it.
And does this include the original deployment of all of the forces and the equipment over?
Yes.
Does it include the additional costs of the preparation for a second deployment?
Yes.
And are there other incremental costs that were covered by the original budget envelope for the ministry, and so were not therefore needed as supplemental funds.
Mr. Rochette.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Chair. Basically, this estimate was prepared in last September and encompass the deployment of the forces, including the redeployment if the operation finish in September, at the end of the fiscal year in March. So we have an $18 million there for redeployment that is included in that cost.
Okay, so there are no incremental costs that were covered by the general budget. They are all included in the supplement.
They're included in this.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Murray, we will call time now. That gives us about 10 minutes to get back for votes. You will have 3 minutes remaining when we return. As quickly after votes as possible, please. We'll now suspend. All right. Thank you, colleagues, and welcome back, ministers and staff. Ms. Murray, you have 3 minutes remaining, please.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying some of the contradictory information in your materials. And so I'd like to ask the minister whether you personally feel that your department has the financial resources it needs for the men and women of Canada's armed forces to do the job we ask of them.
Yes, I do. Of course. Any military could use additional resources, and I know our forces could use additional resources, but put this in perspective, since 2006, the overall budget for D&D has increased by 27%, higher than inflation or economic
Mr. Minister,
growth.
thank you for the answer. I heard your answer, yes, thank you. So one of the myths that the government has been promoting is stable increasing funding for 20 years. However, in 2010, the freezes and cuts started, and the reality is that between 2007 and 2014, an average of 23% of Vote 5 funds were not spent, were deliberately clawed back, and that's compared with an average under the previous government of 2% funds being lapsed. So can the minister explain why $8 billion of defense funding was lapsed while our military is left without adequate equipment, training cycles have been slashed, and inadequate mental health professionals hired to care for those wounded in Afghanistan?
Well, Mr. Chair, I would characterize that as a loaded question, most of the premises of which with which I disagree. For example, the member characterized lapses as deliberate clawbacks. Every department ends up spending less than their authorized amount. That's prudent fiscal management by managers. And if there was a lower ratio of lapsing under the previous government, it's probably because the military budget was so much smaller. I mean, it was down to $12 billion for several years there. So they had to make they had to do as best they could with very meager resources in that period.
Oh. Okay, thank you, Mr.
30
Minister.
seconds, please, Ms. Murray.
The Prime Minister stated in 2008 that if Canada is to be taken seriously in the world, it needs the capacity to act. So I'd like to ask the Minister whether reducing the military expenditure to an all-time low of 1% of GDP, is that part of the plan of increasing Canada's capacity to defend our values and interests abroad?
The truth is the opposite of your characterization, Ms. Murray. The all-time low was when it reached under 0.7% of GDP under the previous Liberal government, as opposed to the 1.2% to which this government increased it. We've given D&D a 2% annual escalator. No other department enjoys that. And this is at a time when virtually all of our major allies are cutting their military budgets in absolute terms while we are actually increasing ours.
I think that's inaccurate information on the part of the Minister.
Ms. Gallant, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It just never ceases to amaze me how the person who likes to talk about slashing and cutting talks about our expenditures when, after the decade of darkness and when they were spending again, it was half of what we're spending now. And in terms of lapses, we're not going to pay for something we haven't received, unlike the Liberals did in the sponsorship program. My first question is for the Minister, Fantino, who mentioned during his presentation that there was a $10,000 transfer from Public Works for a new pay administration, separate and apart from that of the rest of the government. Why is that necessary?
Mr. Chair, members, I'm sure that members understand that CSE has 3 mandates from which they operate: IT security, foreign signals, intelligence, and assistance. And these activities play a vital role in the protection of Canadians and Canadian interests here and at home and abroad. And for personal security reasons, CSE has chosen to continue to administer the pay of its employees independent of other departments. And this means that they have opted out of integrating with the government-wide Phoenix pay system and consolidated its compensation service and public service pay center. That's a $10,500 previously transferred out of CSE budget line that is being reinstated.
So are they implying, though, that the payroll in general is subject to breaches? Why would they need something special over and above what the rest of the employees of the government have?
It's very simply the nature of the work that they do. the fact that they need to have this added protection in carrying out their duties and responsibilities, and it does in fact conform to the whole theme of what CSE does and its people and its vulnerabilities.
Thank you. For Minister Kenney, you mentioned Daesh. For people who may be tuning in today who don't know what that means, would you share that with us?
That's the Arabic name for the organization that goes by currently the Islamic State. That's what they call themselves. Previously known as the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, and the Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Sham. It's the same organization, but the reason I use Daesh is because they regard it as pejorative.
Very good. Thank you. And well, the death cult is even a better description of what they do.
Well, there's many descriptions, but I can tell you that this organization is so depraved that even Al-Qaeda has condemned some of their tactics.
Okay, so that leads to my next question. So we see, as you described, Boko Haram across northeast Africa, and we almost have a total front that's forming upwards towards Europe, across the Middle East as well as North Africa, and then again Al-Shabaab in other parts of Africa. There has been discussion about links between Al-Qaeda and some of these other groups that were splitting off. But is anyone seriously looking at there being an overall umbrella organization that is orchestrating all of these separately or together?
Well, Al-Qaeda certainly played a kind of coordinating role for organizations of this nature, and I believe security experts there's a consensus view that Daesh or ISIL has sought to basically take over Al-Qaeda's leadership role as a coordinating intelligence, if you will, with these various streams of, let's call it jihadist violence. For example, just this past week, Boko Haram, the vicious jihadist terror organization operating in northern Nigeria that became notorious for having kidnapped several hundred Christian girls and sold them into sexual slavery, and having bombed dozens of churches, murdered tens of thousands of individuals. Boko Haram issued a statement indicating its affiliation with Daesh, with ISIL. Similarly, you will recall the grotesque beheading of 21 Coptic Christians on a beach in Libya. When you talk about being close to Europe, that's frankly a day's sail from Italy. We don't believe that the people who committed that act are moving necessarily from Syria and Iraq to Libya, but rather these were jihadists already in Libya by and large, who essentially are affiliating themselves. And this was the point I made in the answer to the very first question, that Daesh, ISIL, by promoting this idea of the caliphate, has become a very seductive idea to movements and individuals who share these distorted ideas. And that's why some of them are seeking to affiliate themselves with ISIL, with Daesh, all the way down to southern Philippines in Mindanao, where there has been a long-time insurgency by Islamist groups who, for example, bombed a school bus last December. Even some of those Islamist groups in southern Philippines in Mindanao have declared their fealty to Daesh. And that's why the fight against this organization in the Middle East has hugely important strategic symbolic and therefore strategic implications across that across all of those countries.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Ms. Gallant. Minister, thank you for accommodating the disruption in timings this afternoon. I understand from your staff you have to go, and we appreciate your willingness to return to discuss the main estimates next month.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, shall vote 1C under the Communications Security Establishment carry? Carried. Shall vote 1C under National Defence carry? Shall the chair report vote 1C under Communications Security Establishment and vote 1C under National Defence to the House? Thank you.
We vote for this stuff. Carried. You heard that.
And we appreciate that, Mr. Hess. Thank you.
Camaraderie around here.
Thank you, colleagues. This meeting will adjourn, and look forward to the next opportunity to meet with the ministers and staff. Thank you.